In the unforgiving grip of the 1875 Montana winter, Ilara Vance and her two young children, Lily and Caleb, clung to life on their dilapidated claim. Their small cabin, a testament to fading hopes, offered little warmth against the biting winds. Ilara, a widow for mere months, felt the weight of every passing day. Her husband Silas had been taken by a sudden fever last winter, leaving behind promises of spring improvements that now felt like cruel taunts. The meager herd of longhorns had dwindled to a few milk cows and a sickly calf. The barn roof sagged, threatening to collapse with the next heavy snowfall. Their once proud wheat field lay half-planted, a monument to her insufficient strength. She had sold Silas's tools, then his trusted mare, and finally her mother's silver locket. But the coin barely covered their most immediate needs. Just yesterday, Barnaby Finch from the land office had visited, his polite words barely concealing the steel in his voice. 3 moons, Mrs. Vance, he'd stated, shuffling papers with practiced detachment. The office has been patient, considering, but we cannot extend the claim further. Ilara stoked the morning's fire, stretching their last handful of oats with dried apple slices for porridge. Lily, 10 years old, but with the solemnity of an adult, came in with a few fresh eggs from their remaining hens. "Only 2 today, Mama," she reported, her young face too serious. "But they're good ones." Ilara forced a smile, her heart aching. 2 eggs wouldn't feed 3 hungry mouths, but Lily needed praise for her diligence. "Fetch Caleb. Breakfast is nearly ready." As Lily went to call her brother, Ilara divided the porridge, giving the children larger portions than her own. She had learned to ignore her own hunger. A mother's sacrifice came as naturally as breathing. Caleb burst in, proudly carrying a bundle of kindling. "Mama, look. I found some dry wood under the old cottonwood." His eyes shone with Silas's own determination, making Ilara's heart clench with both pride and sorrow. "Well done, my brave boy." She ruffled his hair, noting how his shirt sleeves had grown too short. New buckskins would be needed before winter, but that was a worry for another day. Over breakfast, Lily announced, "Mistress Willow at the church said she'd pay me to help with her mending." She stirred her porridge thoughtfully. "I could go after my studies." Ilara's throat tightened. Her children shouldn't have to toil for others at such young ages, but pride had no place in survival. "That's very kind of her, Lily. Just don't neglect your lessons." Education was one thing Ilara refused to sacrifice. Silas had been so adamant about their children learning to read and cipher. After breakfast, Ilara watched her children head to the small schoolhouse a mile down the dusty track. Their patched clothes and worn boots were testaments to their poverty, but they walked tall, just as she'd taught them. Vance's children didn't slouch, no matter their circumstances. Alone in the quiet cabin, Ilara allowed herself a moment of weakness. Tears slid down her cheeks as she gripped the rough-hewn table. "Oh, Silas," she whispered to the empty room, "how am I supposed to do this without you?" The question echoed unanswered, as it had every day since his passing. But she had no choice but to find a way. 3 moons to save their home. 3 moons to perform a miracle. Ilara wiped her eyes, straightened her apron, and stepped outside to face another day of impossible choices and relentless work. Her children needed her to be strong, and strong she would remain, even if it broke her heart in the process. Whispers on the wind. The storm arrived just before dusk, a howling gale that rattled the cabin's timber shutters. Ilara had just finished storing the day's meager harvest, 3 scraggly turnips and a handful of winter squash, when she heard Caleb shouting from outside. "Mama, Mama, come quick." There was an edge to his voice she'd never heard before. Ilara grabbed her shawl, hurrying out into the gathering darkness. The wind whipped her skirts as she followed Caleb's voice toward the edge of their wheat field. Lily was already there, standing rigid as a fence post, staring at something in the growing shadows. "Good Lord," Ilara breathed, crossing herself at the sight before them. A man lay crumpled in the mud, blood darkening his expensive wool coat. Beside him, a magnificent black stallion lay dead, its saddle adorned with elaborate silver conchos that glinted dully in the fading light. The man's clothes spoke of wealth, fine wool, leather boots that cost more than their entire harvest. But wealth meant nothing when life's blood was seeping into Montana's soil. "He's still breathing, Mama," Lily whispered, her face pale in the gathering dark. "We can't leave him out here." Ilara felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. They barely had enough food for themselves, barely enough medicine, barely enough of anything. But her daughter was right. They couldn't leave him to die. "Caleb, run back and stoke the fire. Lily, help me with him." Ilara knelt in the mud, checking the man's pulse. It was there, but weak, fluttering like a trapped bird beneath his skin. The stranger groaned as they turned him over. He was a large man, solid with muscle beneath his fine clothes. Blood matted his dark hair, and more seeped from a wound in his side. His face, though lined with pain, bore the refined features of someone used to commanding respect. "What do you suppose happened to him?" Lily asked, struggling to help her mother drag the unconscious man toward their cabin. "Nothing good," Ilara replied grimly, noting the powder burns around the bullet hole in his shirt. "This was no hunting accident." They managed to get him inside, though Ilara's back screamed in protest. Caleb had the fire blazing, casting worried glances at the blood they were tracking across the floor. "Lily, fetch my herb box. Caleb, bring clean rags and water." Ilara's voice was steady, though her hands shook as she began cutting away the stranger's shirt. The wound was ugly, but the bullet had passed clean through. She'd seen worse during the war, when their farm had served as an informal field hospital. As she cleaned and dressed the wound, Ilara couldn't help noticing other scars on the man's body. Old bullet wounds, knife marks, the tales of a violent life written in flesh. What kind of man was she bringing into her home, near her children? But then she saw something else, a silver pocket watch, blood-stained but finely wrought, hanging from his vest. She carefully opened it, revealing an inscription. "To J.W. With eternal love, Serafina." The watch's owner had been loved once, had been someone's dear one. She couldn't turn him away. Through the night, they tended him. Lily proved invaluable, changing cold compresses and helping prepare poultices from Ilara's dwindling herb supply. Caleb kept the fire stoked and watched at the window, though for what Ilara wasn't sure she wanted to know. The stranger's fever rose with the moon, bringing with it delirious mumblings. "Serafina, forgive me. Should have been there. The papers in the saddle. Must. Hush now." Ilara soothed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You're safe here." Dawn was breaking when his fever finally broke. Ilara sent the children to bed, their young faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. She stayed by the stranger's side, watching the rise and fall of his chest, studying the strong lines of his face. Who was he? What had brought him, wounded and alone, to the edge of their failing claim? The questions tumbled through her tired mind as she kept her vigil. A stranger at the edge. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the cabin window, the stranger's eyes fluttered open. They were a striking sapphire blue, clear and intelligent, despite the lingering effects of fever. For a long moment, he stared at Ilara, confusion giving way to understanding. "You saved my life," he said simply, his voice rough but gentle. Ilara nodded, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the poverty evident in every corner of their cabin. "Rest now. Questions can wait." He caught her hand as she rose, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he whispered, sincerity heavy in his voice. Then his eyes closed again, this time in natural sleep. Ilara watched him for a moment longer, an inexplicable feeling stirring in her chest. Somehow she knew their lives would never be the same after this night. The next 2 days passed in a blur of fevered mutterings and anxious vigilance. Ilara sent the children to school as usual, not wanting to disrupt their routine, but she could see their minds were back at the cabin with their mysterious guest. Even at school, Lily later reported, they couldn't escape the intrigue. Caleb had found a crumpled, wanted poster by the schoolhouse, showing rough-looking men who'd been terrorizing nearby ranches. "Probably the same ones who shot him, Mama," Caleb whispered over dinner, his eyes wide with excitement. "Maybe he's a lawman hunting them down." "Or maybe," Lily added thoughtfully, stirring her thin stew, "he's running from them." Ilara shushed them both, though the same questions had been haunting her. The stranger's expensive clothes suggested wealth, but the scars on his body spoke of violence. His fevered ramblings painted an even more complex picture. "The Triple Crown must protect the Triple Crown," he'd mutter, tossing restlessly. Other times, he'd call out for Serafina, the name from the pocket watch, his voice thick with grief. Then there were the troubling moments when he'd suddenly tense, hands clenching, as if reaching for a pistol, speaking of ambushes and betrayal. During his more lucid moments, he was unfailingly courteous, thanking Ilara for each small kindness with the manners of a true gentleman. He'd even tried to refuse their precious venison broth, seeing how little they had. "Ma'am, I can't take food from your children's mouths." "Nonsense," Ilara had replied firmly, though her heart warmed at his consideration. A body needs strength to heal. On the third morning, while changing his bandages, Ilara noticed his fever had finally broken completely. His sapphire eyes were clear as they followed her movements, and there was color in his face, beyond the flush of illness. "Your children," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been. "They're well behaved. You've done a fine job with them." Ilara's hand stilled for a moment. "Thank you. They're good kids. They've had to grow up too fast, though." He nodded, understanding in his gaze as he looked around their humble cabin. "Times are hard." "We manage," Ilara said, perhaps too quickly. Pride made her add, "We are not looking for charity, mister." She let the question hang. A small smile touched his lips. "Julian, Julian Thorne." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "And I would never presume to offer charity, Mrs. Vance, but I believe in paying my debts." Something in his tone made Ilara look up sharply. He held her gaze steadily, and she had the unsettling feeling he'd seen every patch in their clothes, every crack in the walls, every sign of their desperate circumstances. Before she could respond, Lily burst through the door, out of breath. "Mama! Ryder's coming!" Fear threaded through her voice, and Ilara's heart clenched. Julian Thorne's reaction was immediate. Gone was the invalid. In his place was a man of action, despite his wounds. "Get the children behind the root cellar door," he ordered quietly, already trying to rise. "Anyone asks, you haven't seen a soul." Ilara helped him to the back room, questions burning on her tongue. Who were these men? Why was he so certain they meant harm? But there was no time. Horses were approaching. She hurried Lily and Caleb into the root cellar, pressing a finger to her lips. Then she smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and opened the cabin door just as three riders pulled up. They were rough-looking men, trail dust coating their clothes, six-shooters worn openly on their hips. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, touched his hat with mock politeness. "Afternoon, ma'am. We're looking for a friend of ours. Tall fellow, well-dressed, might have passed through here recently." Ilara met his gaze steadily, channeling every bit of Silas's strength. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description. We don't get many visitors out here." The man's eyes narrowed, studying her face for signs of deception. Behind him, his companions were eyeing the property with predatory interest. "Mind if we look around, just to be thorough?" "I do mind," Ilara replied, stilling her voice. "My children are inside, and I don't allow strange men near them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She held her ground, heart pounding, until they finally turned their horses away. Only when they were dots on the horizon did she close the door and sag against it, trembling. What kind of man was she harboring, and what had she gotten her family into? The price of mercy. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ilara confronted Julian with a cup of willow bark tea and questions that couldn't wait until morning. He sat propped up in the bed they'd made him on the floor, looking more like himself despite the pallor of recovery. "Those men," Ilara began, keeping her voice low, "they weren't friends of yours." "No, ma'am." Julian accepted the tea with a grateful nod. "And I thank you for not telling them about me, though it must have cost you, lying like that." Ilara settled into Silas's old rocking chair, her fingers absently tracing the worn armrests. "What I told them wasn't exactly a lie. I haven't seen their friend, only a wounded man who needed help." A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. "You have a diplomatic way with words, Mrs. Vance." He reached beside him and withdrew a folded document from his coat. "I believe it's time you knew who you're harboring." The paper he handed her was a deed. Not just any deed, but one for the Triple Crown Ranch, one of the largest spreads in the territory. Ilara's eyes widened as she read the name. Julian Wade Thorne. "You own the Triple Crown." She'd heard of the ranch, of course. Everyone had. Its owner was known to be wealthy, but reclusive, a mystery to most folks in the territory. "I do." Julian set down his tea, his expression growing serious. "Those men who came today, they work for Jeremiah Stone, though not officially. He's been trying to buy the Triple Crown for years, by any means necessary." His hand drifted to his healing wound. This was his latest attempt at persuasion. Ilara's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The expensive clothes, the fine horse, the way he carried himself. It all made sense now, but one thing didn't. "Why tell me this?" "Because you and your children risked everything to save a stranger." Julian met her eyes steadily. "You deserve to know the truth, and to understand the risk you took. More importantly, you deserve to know I have the means to protect you from any consequences of that kindness." Ilara straightened in her chair, pride flaring. "We didn't help you expecting payment, Mr. Thorne." "Julian, please." His voice softened. "And I know you didn't. That's precisely why I want to help." Caleb chose that moment to appear in the doorway, sleep-tousled and clutching his father's old wooden horse. "Mama, I heard voices." Ilara rose to guide him back to bed, but Julian spoke first. "Come here, young man." Caleb approached cautiously, his curiosity overcoming his shyness. Julian reached into his coat again and produced a small, carved horse. Its details were fine enough to show every muscle and flowing mane. "I've been working on this while I rest," Julian explained, handing it to Caleb. "Kept me from going stir-crazy. What do you think?" Caleb's eyes lit up as he examined the carving. "It looks just like your horse, sir. The one that—" His voice trailed off, remembering the dead stallion. "Yes, it does." Julian's voice held no bitterness, only gentle understanding. His name was Shadow. He was a good friend. He showed Caleb how the wooden horse's legs were jointed, allowing it to be posed. "Every good horse needs a good owner to care for it. Think you can do that?" Caleb nodded solemnly, clutching both wooden horses to his chest. Alara felt tears pricking at her eyes, remembering how Silas used to spend evenings carving toys for the children. "Thank you, sir." "Julian," Caleb corrected himself, beaming. "I'll take real good care of it." After Alara had tucked Caleb back into bed, she returned to find Julian looking thoughtful. "He's a fine boy," he said. "Reminds me of myself at that age before—" He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. "Before what?" "Before I learned that the world isn't always kind to dreamers." Julian shifted, wincing slightly. "Your children still have that light in their eyes, Mrs. Vance. Despite everything, they haven't lost hope. That's a testament to your strength." Alara felt her cheeks warm. "Alara, please. If I'm to call you Julian—" "Alara," she smiled, and for a moment she saw past the wealthy rancher to the man beneath. One who'd known loss, who understood struggle, who recognized the value of simple kindness. "I think tomorrow I might be strong enough to show Caleb how to properly whittle, if you approve, of course." She found herself smiling back. "I think he'd like that very much." Neither of them mentioned the deed, still lying between them, or the men who might return, or the growing sense that their lives were changing in ways they couldn't yet understand. For now, it was enough to share this quiet moment, warmed by the embers of trust beginning to glow between them. Secrets of the Silver Star. As Julian regained his strength over the next few days, Ilara noticed him watching her family with an expression she couldn't quite read. He spent mornings teaching Caleb to whittle, afternoons listening to Lily read from her school books, and evenings sharing stories of long cattle drives and frontier life that had both children spellbound. But it was the quiet moments that revealed most about their mysterious guest. One afternoon, while the children were at school, Ilara found him standing at the window, holding a worn photograph she hadn't seen before. In it, a beautiful young woman smiled at the camera, her hand resting on a younger Julian's shoulder. "Serafina," he said quietly, without turning around. "My wife." Ilara paused in her mending, hearing the weight of loss in those two words. "The one from the pocket watch inscription?" He nodded, finally turning to face her. "She died 8 years ago. Fever took her and our unborn child." His fingers traced the photograph's edge. "I built the Triple Crown for her, you know. She always wanted a place where we could raise a family, grow old together. By the time it was finished, she was gone." The revelations settled in the quiet cabin, like dust motes in sunlight. Ilara understood now why the wealthy owner of the Triple Crown lived alone, why his eyes sometimes held such shadows. "Silas, my husband, he built this cabin with his own hands," Ilara offered, sharing her own grief in return. "Said every nail was a promise of our future together." Julian settled into the chair across from her, his wound allowing more movement. "Now, how did you meet him?" "At a barn raising. He was the only one who didn't treat me like a delicate flower, because I was the preacher's daughter." Ilara smiled at the memory. "First thing he said was, 'Those hands look like they know honest work.' Smart man he was." Ilara resumed her mending, the familiar motion soothing. "The children are so much like him. Lily has his determination, and Caleb his gentle heart. They're extraordinary children, Julian agreed, watching her work. The way they've stepped up to help their mother, never complaining about the burdens they carry, reminds me that strength comes in many forms. Ilara's hands stilled. Sometimes I worry it's too much for them. They should be playing, not... She gestured at their threadbare surroundings. They play, Julian said softly. I've watched them, but they also understand what matters. Family, loyalty, hard work. Those are lessons many adults never learn. Their eyes met across the cabin, and Ilara felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared understanding, of parallel griefs that had shaped them both. The moment was broken by the children's return from school, their voices carrying across the yard. Lily burst in first, clutching a piece of paper. Julian, the teacher said my arithmetic was perfect today. Did she now? Julian's entire demeanor changed, warming like sunshine, breaking through clouds. Well, that deserves a proper celebration. How about I teach you to calculate cattle percentages? Every rancher needs to know their numbers. As Lily settled beside him at the table, Caleb hovering nearby to listen, Ilara watched them together. Julian treated the children with a natural ease that spoke of the father he might have been had life turned out differently. There was no condescension in his manner, no false praise, just genuine interest and gentle guidance. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Ilara found Julian on the porch, staring at the stars. His wound was healing well, which meant he'd be leaving soon. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. I've been alone at the Triple Crown for so long, he said, without preamble. I'd forgotten what it feels like to have a family around. He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in the moonlight. Thank you for reminding me. Ilara wanted to say something about loneliness, about healing, about how his presence had brought something vital back to their home. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, understanding passing between them in the quiet night air. They stood together in comfortable silence, while somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a lonely sound that echoed across the prairie and settled in their hearts. A shadow on the horizon. The morning Julian Thorne declared himself well enough to ride brought both relief and an unexpected sadness to the Vance household. He'd borrowed one of the neighbors' horses the day before, sending Caleb to arrange it, and now stood in their kitchen, looking more the wealthy rancher than the wounded man they'd nursed back to health. Before I leave, he said, placing a thick envelope on the table, there's something we need to discuss. Ilara eyed the envelope wearily, her spine stiffening. We've managed just fine before, Mr. Thorne. Julian, he corrected gently. And yes, you have managed. But at what cost? He pulled out a chair, gesturing for her to sit. Please, hear me out. Ilara sat, noting how Lily and Caleb hovered in the doorway, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Julian noticed them too, and smiled warmly. Children, would you give your mother and me a moment? The request was kind, but firm. They retreated reluctantly, though Ilara suspected they'd be listening from just outside. Julian sat across from her, pushing the envelope forward. This is a bank notice. I've settled your mortgage. Ilara's hand flew to her throat. You had no right. Perhaps not, he agreed, raising a hand to forestall her protest. But I had the means and the will. The bank will no longer be threatening to take your home. Tears pricked at Ilara's eyes, relief warring with pride. We can't accept. You can, and you will. Julian's voice was quiet, but determined. Not as charity, Ilara, as an investment in people who showed extraordinary kindness to a stranger. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But that's not all I'm proposing. From his coat, he withdrew another document. The Triple Crown needs good people, honest people. I'm offering you a partnership of sorts. Ilara's hands trembled as she took the paper. It was a contract, carefully worded, outlining a position as manager of a new breeding operation he proposed to start on her land. Your property sits on excellent grazing land, Julian explained, with some improvements, a new barn, proper fencing, quality stock. It could be productive again. The children could continue their schooling, but also learn ranching, if they're interested. He paused, watching her face. You'd be paid a fair wage, plus a percentage of the operation's profits. Ilara stared at the contract, her mind whirling. Why? Because in the week I've spent here, I've seen more genuine strength and dignity than I've encountered in years of business dealings. Julian's voice softened. Your children are bright and hard-working. You're capable and determined. The Triple Crown would benefit from having people like you associated with it. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small key. There's a strongbox in my saddlebag. Would you ask Caleb to fetch it? When Caleb brought the box, Julian opened it carefully. Inside lay banknotes and additional papers. This is an advance on your salary, enough to make the immediate improvements the property needs. And these, he indicated the papers, are recommendations from associates in town. The general store, the mercantile, the lumber yard. They'll extend you credit on my account for whatever supplies you require. Ilara's pride warred with practicality. The offer was more than generous, it was life-changing. But accepting help, especially on this scale, I won't be beholden to any man, she said finally, her voice firm. Julian smiled. I wouldn't expect you to be. This is business, Ilara. Pure and simple. You'll work hard for everything you receive. He gestured to the contract. Read it carefully. Have a lawyer look it over, if you wish. I'll abide by whatever decision you make. Lily's voice came from the doorway, unable to contain herself any longer. Does this mean we can fix the barn? Julian turned, his expression warm. If your mother agrees, yes. And maybe add a few horses for you and Caleb to learn on. Caleb appeared beside his sister, eyes wide. Real horses? Of our own? Caleb, Ilara cautioned, but Julian held up a hand. Let them dream a little, Ilara. His eyes met hers. Sometimes dreams are what give us the courage to accept help when pride would rather we didn't. Ilara looked at her children's hopeful faces, then back at the papers before her. She thought of Silas, of his dreams for their family, of how he'd always said opportunity wore strange disguises. I'll need time to think about it, she said finally. Julian nodded, standing. Of course. I'll return in 3 days. He moved toward the door, then paused. Remember, Ilara, accepting help doesn't mean surrendering your independence. Sometimes it means choosing a different path to the same destination. After he'd gone, Ilara sat at the table for a long time, the contract before her, listening to her children's excited whispers and feeling the weight of possibility pressing against her chest like a physical thing. A reckoning approaches. The architect's plans for the homestead renovation lay spread across Ilara's kitchen table, blue lines sketching out a future she was still learning to believe in. 3 weeks had passed since she'd signed Julian's contract, and already the property was transforming. The new barn rose quickly, its fresh-cut timber fragrant in the spring air. Local men, hearing that Julian Thorne of the Triple Crown was backing the project, had appeared, offering their labor. Ilara watched them work from her doorway, remembering barn raisings of the past, when Silas had been alive and their future had seemed so certain. It's good bones, Julian said, coming to stand beside her. He'd been riding out every few days to oversee the work, though Ilara suspected he had other reasons for his frequent visits. Like this whole place just needed someone to see the potential. The town had buzzed with gossip when word spread about their arrangement. Ilara heard the whispers at church, saw the speculative glances. Some, some, like Mistress Willow, approached with genuine warmth, pleased to see the Vance family's fortunes turning. Others, like the banker's wife, watched with barely concealed disapproval at what they assumed was happening between the widow and the wealthy rancher. Let them talk, Julian had said when she'd mentioned it. People who have never known struggle are quick to judge those who have. There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with such judgments. Lily and Caleb seemed oblivious to the gossip, too excited by each new development. The arrival of the first two horses, gentle, well-trained animals Julian had chosen specifically for them, had brought tears to their eyes. Now they spent every free moment at the corral, learning to ride under Julian's patient instruction. "Back straight, Caleb," he called out now, watching the boy guide his mount in careful circles. "That's it. You're a natural son." The word son slipped out naturally, and Ilara saw Caleb sit a little straighter in the saddle. Julian hadn't seemed to notice what he'd said, but Ilara felt its weight. He'd been filling spaces in their lives they hadn't even realized were empty. "The foundation for the new wing will be started tomorrow," Julian said, consulting the plans again. "The children should each have their own room." Ilara traced the blue lines with her finger. "It seems like so much, Julian." "Not compared to what you've given me." His voice was quiet, serious. When she looked up, questioning, he continued. "A reminder of what matters, why I built the Triple Crown in the first place. It was never meant to be just about profit." A commotion from the corral interrupted them. Lily had managed her first proper trot, her face glowing with achievement. "Mama, did you see?" "Well done, darling," Ilara called back, her heart full. She hadn't heard such joy in her daughter's voice since before Silas died. Julian smiled at Lily's progress, then turned back to Ilara. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss. The school board had a meeting yesterday." Ilara tensed, remembering the times she'd had to beg for understanding when she couldn't afford the children's books. "I've arranged for a proper library to be built," Julian continued, "and for a second teacher to be hired. The children in this district deserve every opportunity to learn." "The whole district?" Ilara asked, surprised. Not just, not just Lily and Caleb?" Julian shook his head. "Education lifts everyone, Ilara. Your children help me remember that, watching them with their books every evening." She studied his profile. This man who'd entered their lives like a character from one of Lily's adventure novels. "Why are you really doing all this, Julian?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching Caleb and Lily with their horses. "When Serafina died, I forgot something important," he said finally. "I forgot that wealth without purpose is just weight in your pockets. Your family, you reminded me what it means to build something meaningful." A shout from the barn drew their attention. The workers had finished raising the main beam. Soon, there would be a stable for the horses, storage for hay, a proper tack room. The architectural plans showed it all, every detail carefully considered. "Progress," Julian said softly, satisfaction in his voice. "But this is just the beginning." Ilara looked at him sharply, hearing something in his tone that suggested he meant more than just the buildings. But before she could ask, Lily called for him to watch her trot again. And he moved away, leaving Ilara to wonder about the changes taking place not just to their property, but to their hearts. Forged in the storm, Lily's first riding saddle arrived on a Tuesday morning. the tooled leather gleaming with intricate patterns of desert roses and wild sage. She stood speechless, running her fingers over the detailed work, while Julian explained the craftsmanship that had gone into its making. Every good horsewoman needs her own saddle, he said, showing her how to care for the leather. This one's size just for you. The design, he paused, something flickering in his eyes. The desert roses were Seraphina's favorite, seemed fitting somehow. Ilara, watching from the barn doorway, caught the significance of the gesture. He wasn't just giving Lily a saddle, he was sharing something of his past, weaving threads of his lost dreams into their new beginning. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, then surprised them all by throwing her arms around Julian's waist. He stood frozen for a moment before his arms came around her, his expression a mixture of joy and old pain. "Well now," he said gruffly, clearing his throat, "let's see it on that mare of yours." The lessons that followed weren't just about riding. Julian taught Lily and Caleb the proper way to approach a horse, how to read its mood, how to earn its trust. Ilara found herself learning too, watching the patient way he built their confidence. "Horses are like people," he explained one afternoon as Caleb struggled to get his mount to cooperate. "They know when you're nervous or unsure. You have to believe in yourself before they'll believe in you." Caleb frowned, gripping the reins too tightly. "But what if I make a mistake?" "Then you learn from it." Julian adjusted the boy's hands gently. "That's all any of us can do. Your father, he would have taught you these things, wouldn't he?" Caleb nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He promised to teach me everything about the claim when I got bigger." "He'd be proud of you now," Julian said quietly. "Learning new things, helping your mother, being brave, even when it's hard." He stepped back, gesturing to the horse. "Now, show me that turn again. Remember, confidence." Ilara watched her son straighten his shoulders, determination replacing uncertainty. The horse responded immediately to his more assured handling, executing a perfect turn. "That's my boy," Julian called out, pride evident in his voice. He turned to find Ilara watching them, and something passed between them, an understanding of what these moments meant. Later that evening, as Ilara prepared dinner, she heard Julian and Lily on the porch, their voices carrying through the open window. Lily was asking about the Triple Crown, about the cattle operations and breeding programs. "I want to learn everything," Lily declared. "Mama says girls can do anything, if they set their minds to it." "Your mama's a wise woman," Julian replied. "You know, some of the best ranch managers I know are women. They have a natural way with the animals, an attention to detail that many men miss. Could I be a ranch manager someday? With hard work and learning?" "Absolutely." Julian's voice held no condescension, only genuine encouragement. "Tell you what, tomorrow I'll show you how we keep the breeding records. Mathematics, genealogy, careful observation. It all matters in building a strong herd." Ilara stirred the stew, remembering Silas's words about Lily. That girl's got more fire in her soul than most grown men. He would have loved seeing her like this, eyes bright with purpose, mind eager for knowledge. The screen door creaked as Caleb joined his sister and Julian on the porch. Soon they were deep in conversation about different horse breeds, the boy's natural curiosity drawing out Julian's extensive knowledge. Ilara listened to their voices blending in the gathering dusk, her children's bright questions, Julian's thoughtful answers, the easy laughter they shared. This was what healing sounded like, she realized. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of new joy, growing alongside cherished memories. Julian caught her eye through the window, and his smile held a warmth that made her heart flutter. He'd given them more than material security. He'd given them back their sense of possibility, their right to dream beyond mere survival. "Mama," Caleb called out, "Julian says I can help with the new calves when they come." "Real ranch work. That's wonderful, darling," she answered, her voice steady, despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Now, wash up for dinner, both of you." As the children clattered inside, Julian lingered on the porch, his expression thoughtful. "They're quick learners," he said, when she joined him, "like their mother." Ilara felt her cheeks warm. "We've had a good teacher." His hand found hers in the growing darkness, a brief touch that felt as natural as breathing. "We're all learning together, Ilara. That's what family does." The word family hung in the air between them, full of question and promise. Echoes of the past summer mellowed into autumn, painting the Montana sky in rich golds and deep blues. Julian unrolled a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table, showing Ilara how their modest homestead had grown. New fencing stretched across expanded pastures. The renovated barn stood proud and sturdy, and the wheat field, Silas's pride and joy, had yielded its first abundant harvest in years. "The soil here is exceptional," Julian explained, his finger tracing the boundaries of their property. "With proper crop rotation and the new irrigation system, you'll see even better yields next season." Ilara studied the map, marveling at how their world had expanded. "I never thought I'd see this place thrive again." "You always had the foundation for success." Julian's voice was warm. "It just needed some support to rebuild." The Harvest Festival was approaching, and for the first time since Silas's death, Ilara felt ready to truly participate. The Vance family had always contributed in the past, but this year would be different. Their root cellar was full, their pantry stocked, and Lily had even won a ribbon at the county fair for her horsemanship. Mistress Willow asked if we'd host the quilting circle next week, Ilara mentioned, smoothing her apron. "Said our new parlor addition would be perfect for it." Julian smiled, understanding the significance. The quilting circle was more than just sewing. It was the heart of the community's social network, where reputations were made or mended. Their inclusion marked a shift in how the town viewed their changed circumstances. "You should accept," he said. "Those women will see what I've seen all along, a family that perseveres with grace." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Lily and Caleb rode into view, their horses moving in perfect sync as they checked the fence line. Julian had taught them to ride as a team, explaining that ranch work required trust in your partner as much as skill with your mount. "They look like they were born to it," Ilara said softly, watching her children through the window. They were. It was just sleeping in their blood, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Julian stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Like other things that sleep until the right moment. Ilara felt her cheeks warm, aware of his nearness. These moments had been happening more frequently. Quiet conversations that held deeper meanings, casual touches that lingered just a moment too long. The town's gossip had shifted from scandal to speculation about when, not if, the wealthy rancher would make his intentions known. But Julian never rushed, never presumed. He was building this relationship as carefully as he'd helped them rebuild the farm, laying each stone of trust with patient deliberation. The children burst in, bringing the crisp autumn air with them. "Papa." "I mean, Julian," Caleb corrected himself, flushing. "We found 2 breaks in the north fence, but we marked them just like you showed us." The slip didn't go unnoticed. Julian's eyes met Ilara's briefly, before he turned to Caleb. "Good work, son. Show me on the map where you found them." As Caleb eagerly pointed out the locations, Lily joined Elara at the stove. Mama, Mistress Finch at the general store said they're looking for help with bookkeeping. She remembered how good I am with numbers from when Julian taught me the breeding records. Do you think we'll discuss it? We'll discuss it, Elara promised, proud of her daughter's initiative. The idea of Lily working in town would have worried her before, but now, with their secure foundation and Julian's steady influence, it felt right to let her spread her wings. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Julian lingered by the door. The Harvest Festival, he said. I thought perhaps, that is, if you'd allow me to escort you and the children. Elara felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was endearing to see the confident rancher stumbling over words like a shy suitor. We'd be honored, she replied simply. His answering smile lit his entire face. Then I'll bid you good night, Mrs. Vance. He tipped his hat, a gesture that managed to be both proper and intimate. As she watched him ride away in the gathering dusk, Elara touched the window frame that Silas had crafted so long ago. The gnarled wood was smooth under her fingers, solid and dependable, like the foundation of their new life. Sometimes love built things to last beyond its own time, she realized, and sometimes it came back in new forms when you were finally ready to embrace it. A new dawn on the prairie. The storm came without warning, rolling across the prairie like God's own fury. Elara stood at the window, watching lightning split the afternoon sky into jagged pieces. The air felt wrong, too green, too heavy, and the wind carried a sound she'd never heard before, a low moaning that made the horses stamp nervously in their stalls. Mama! Lily burst through the door, her hair wild from the wind. Julian's riding in from the Triple Crown. He says there's a twister coming. As if summoned by her words, Julian's horse appeared through the curtain of rain, its hooves throwing mud as he pushed it hard toward the house. He was off its back before it fully stopped, his face grim. Storm cellar now, he ordered, his voice carrying over the wind's howl. Caleb, help me get the horses into the barn. Lily, grab the emergency supplies your mother prepared. Elara, I'm not staying in the cellar while you and Caleb are out there. She cut him off, already moving to help Lily. A crack of lightning illuminated his face, worry warring with admiration. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was love in the words. Fine, but be quick about it. They worked as one unit, no hesitation or confusion. The family's practiced emergency routine, combined with Julian's calm authority, made every moment count as they led the frightened horses into the barn. Elara glimpsed the lightning-damaged beam that would become their crisis point. Caleb spotted it too. Julian, look. He pointed at the main support where lightning had blackened and split the wood. The whole structure groaned ominously in the wind. Get out now. Julian pushed them toward the door, but it was too late. With a sound like rifle shots, the beam began to splinter. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Julian shoved Caleb clear of danger, but the shifting beam caught his own shoulder, driving him to his knees. Elara screamed his name, fighting against the wind to reach him. The rope, he gasped, pointing to the wall. Elara, you know what to do. She did know. They'd practiced emergency repairs. Caleb, Lily, the support poles, just like we trained. The children moved without question, grabbing the reinforcement poles they'd stored for just such emergencies. Elara's hands flew over the rope, creating the pulley system Julian had taught her. Together, they worked to brace the failing beam, the family moving like parts of a well-oiled machine. Never thought, Julian grunted as he helped position the support despite his injured shoulder. I'd be so grateful for those practice drills. Less talking, more bracing, Ilara ordered, but she caught his proud smile through the rain streaming down their faces. The storm raged around them, but inside the barn, four people worked in perfect synchronization. Lily, who'd learned knots from Julian during their riding lessons, secured the temporary braces. Caleb, remembering everything his father had taught him about wood and everything Julian had added about engineering, helped calculate the angles of support. When the last brace was secured, they stood back, breathing hard, watching the reinforced beam hold against the wind's assault. The barn creaked and shuddered, but it held. "Into the house, quickly," Julian directed, cradling his injured arm. "The twister's still coming." They made it to the storm cellar just as the tornado touched down, its roar drowning out all other sounds. In the lamplight below ground, Ilara examined Julian's shoulder, while the children huddled together, listening to the chaos above. "It's not dislocated," she announced with relief, her hands gentle on his skin. "But you'll have some magnificent bruises." "Worth it," he said softly, his good hand covering hers where it rested on his shoulder. "Ilara, seeing you all work together like that, we had a good teacher." She met his eyes in the dim light. "You've given us more than protection, Julian. You've given us the tools to protect ourselves." Lily's voice came from where she sat with Caleb. "We're not afraid, Mama. Well, not as much as we used to be. Julian taught us that being prepared is better than being afraid. And that family takes care of each other," Caleb added firmly. Julian's breath caught at the boy's words, and Ilara felt his hand tighten on hers. Above them, the storm began to fade, its fury spending itself across the prairie. They stayed in the cellar until the all clear, talking quietly, drawing comfort from each other's presence. When they finally emerged, the barn stood solid, wounded but unbowed, like the family that had fought to save it. The lightning-scarred beam would become a reminder of this night, of how crisis had proven what they were becoming, a family bound by more than blood or circumstance, forged in challenge and strengthened by love. Echoes of the Past, Part 2. Ilara found Julian's journal by accident, while helping him change his bandages after the storm. It fell from his coat pocket, leather-bound and well-worn, opening to pages filled with a neat, architectural hand. She tried to look away, but a familiar name caught her eye. Serafina would have loved the Vance children. "It's all right," Julian said softly, noticing her discovery. "Read it if you'd like. There shouldn't be secrets between—" He paused, letting the unspoken word hang between them. Ilara sat beside him, the journal warm in her hands. His writing revealed a soul deeper than she'd imagined, pages filled with both pain and hope. He wrote of Serafina's death, of dark years wandering the Triple Crown alone, of how an act of kindness from a struggling widow and her children had awakened something he'd thought forever lost. "I've been writing again since I met your family," he admitted, watching her read. "Serafina always said I kept my feelings too close, that I needed to let them breathe on paper." "She sounds wise," Ilara said gently, turning a page to find a sketch of Lily on horseback, Caleb working with his new tools, herself standing in the doorway of their home. "She would have adored you all." Julian's voice was thick with emotion. "Sometimes I think she led me here, that night I was shot, her way of telling me to stop hiding from life." Ilara closed the journal carefully. "Tell me about her. The real Serafina, not just the memory." Julian smiled, settling back in his chair. "She loved desert roses, hence Lily's saddle design. Said they reminded her that beauty opens fresh each day." He chuckled softly. "She was terrible at cooking, but wouldn't admit it. Burned everything except coffee. But she could charm anyone, from ranch hands to bankers. How did you meet? At a charity auction in Denver. I was there to buy breeding stock. She was organizing the event, trying to raise money for an orphan's home. His eyes grew distant with memory. She convinced me to donate 3 times what I'd planned. Said if I had money to buy fancy cattle, I had money to help orphans. Ilara smiled, imagining the scene. She challenged you, like someone else I know. His good hand found hers. Ilara, I've been wanting to tell you these past months, watching you fight for your children, seeing your strength and grace. I never thought I'd feel this way again. Julian, let me finish, please. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not trying to replace Silas, just as you're not replacing Serafina. But I think they'd both be happy seeing us find our way to each other. Tears pricked at Ilara's eyes. The children adore you, and I love them as my own. He shifted to face her fully. I love their mother too, with a depth that both surprises and humbles me. Ilara's heart thundered in her chest. They'd been moving toward this moment for months, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them real, irrevocable. I've been afraid, she admitted. Not of loving you, but of depending on someone again, of risking loss. I know. Julian's thumb traced circles on her palm. We've both learned the hard way that love means risking pain, but it also means choosing joy, choosing life. He gestured to his journal. I've been writing our story, Ilara, not just mine, but all of us. How fate, or providence, brought us together. How your family taught me to live again. Ilara thought of Silas, of his dream for their children, his hope for their future. She thought of Serafina, who had taught Julian to open his heart on paper. Their loves hadn't ended with death. They had transformed, becoming the foundation for something new. Read me what you've written, she asked softly. Julian opened the journal again, finding a recent entry. His voice was gentle as he read about Lily's first successful cattle drive, Caleb's growing skill with carpentry, the way Ilara's laugh had begun to sound free again. He wrote of healing, of second chances, of love that grew not in spite of past grief, but because of it, because loss had taught them the precious nature of joy. As his words filled the quiet room, Ilara felt the last walls around her heart crumbling. They were building something beautiful here, not just on paper or on the land, but in the spaces between their hearts, in the way their broken pieces fit together to make something whole and new. The first snow fell early that year, blanketing the Vance homestead in pristine white. Ilara stood at her bedroom window, watching Julian teach the children how to read weather signs in the morning sky. Their breath frosted the air as he pointed out cloud formations, explaining how to predict blizzards from nature's subtle hints. This winter felt different from the last, not just because of their well-tended barn and sturdy roof, but because of the warmth that filled their home despite the cold outside. The evidence of that warmth lay scattered throughout the house. Handmade Christmas gifts carefully hidden in dresser drawers, secret whispers between Lily and Caleb as they planned surprises, the quiet contentment in Julian's eyes when he thought no one was watching. The Miller family lost their cabin in that fire last week, Lily mentioned at dinner, pushing her stew around thoughtfully. Mary Miller said they're staying in the church basement until spring. Julian set down his spoon, meeting Ilara's eyes across the table. They'd already discussed taking in the Millers, but had waited to hear what the children thought. It's awful cold in that basement, Caleb added, and they've got little ones. Ilara smiled, proud of her children's gentle hearts. What do you two think about sharing your rooms for a while? The Millers could use our new addition until they rebuild. We'd have to move the Christmas tree, Lily calculated, but it would look nice in the front parlor anyway. And I could help Mr. Miller with the rebuilding, Caleb offered. Julian has been teaching me about house frames. Julian cleared his throat, clearly moved by their immediate acceptance of the idea. That's settled then. I'll ride over tomorrow and make the offer. Later that evening, after the Millers had been invited and welcomed, Elara found Julian in the barn, working on something he quickly covered with a cloth. No peeking, he warned, smiling. Christmas secrets. She leaned against the door frame, watching him work by lamplight. You've started quite a tradition, you know. The children are determined their handmade gifts must be perfect. Speaking of which, he pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. This one can't wait until Christmas. Inside was a beautiful, leather-bound book filled with blank pages, its cover tooled with desert roses, like Lily's saddle. I thought, Julian said softly, you might want to write your own story. The children's too. Memory is precious, Elara. It should be preserved. Elara ran her fingers over the soft leather, thinking of Julian's journal, of the way he'd used writing to heal. Thank you, she whispered. A commotion from the house interrupted them, the Millers arriving with their meager belongings. Elara and Julian hurried to help, watching as their children welcomed the younger Miller kids with natural warmth. That night, with two families crowded under one roof, Elara wrote the first entry in her new journal. Today, we learned that home stretches to hold what love requires. The children gave up their rooms without hesitation, understanding instinctively what Julian and I have come to know, that blessings multiply when shared. The days grew shorter, but their evenings grew richer. Julian taught both families his mother's old frontier songs, while they made decorations from pine cones and ribbon. The Miller children added their own traditions, paper snowflakes, Swedish prayers, stories of their grandmother's homeland. Lily and Mary Miller became thick as thieves, spending hours together making gifts for their families. Caleb took young Billy Miller under his wing, teaching him about tools and wood with the same patience Julian had shown him. The smell of Christmas baking filled the house, Elara and Mrs. Miller trading recipes, mixing traditions as easily as they mixed dough. Even Mr. Miller's quiet depression began to lift as Julian involved him in planning the rebuild of their cabin, giving him hope to carry through the winter. One evening, Elara found Julian standing in the doorway of the crowded parlor, watching their expanded family with misty eyes. Having second thoughts about taking them in? She asked softly. He shook his head, thinking about Serafina again, but differently now. He turned to Elara, taking her hand. She always said wealth was meant to be shared, that a home should be as big as its heart. He smiled. She would have loved this chaos. Silas, too, Elara agreed. He believed in neighbors helping neighbors. Julian pulled her closer, both of them watching as Lily taught the youngest Miller girl to string cranberries. We're not just honoring their memories anymore, are we? We're building something new, something that belongs to all of us. Elara leaned into his strength, feeling the truth of his words. This Christmas, with its handmade gifts and shared burdens, its blended traditions and expanded family, was teaching them all what love could build when given room to grow. The threatening letter arrived on a bright January morning, carried by a ranch hand from the Triple Crown who'd ridden hard through the snow. Elara recognized Jeremiah Stone's elegant handwriting even before Julian's face darkened at the sight of it. The children? Julian asked quietly, scanning the contents. At school? Elara replied, moving to read over his shoulder. The words made her blood run cold. Thorn, Your recent domestic arrangements haven't gone unnoticed. Quite touching how you found yourself a ready-made family. Would be a shame if anything happened to them. The Triple Crown could have been transferred peacefully. Now, well, even the strongest barn can burn. Consider this a final courtesy. Julian crumpled the paper, his knuckles white. I should have known he wouldn't let it rest. Stone's never been one to accept defeat gracefully. Tell me, Ilara said, laying a hand on his arm. All of it this time. Julian sank into a chair, suddenly looking weary. Jeremiah Stone and I were partners once, years ago. He helped finance the Triple Crown's early days, when banks wouldn't touch a young rancher's dreams. But his vision was different from mine. How so? He wanted to build an empire, squeeze out smaller ranches, control the whole territory. I wanted to create something sustainable, something that would help the community grow. Julian's jaw tightened. When I bought him out, he didn't take it well. Started acquiring land around the Triple Crown, trying to choke us off from water rights, grazing lands. The night you were shot, his men, Ilara confirmed, they'd been pressuring other ranchers to sell. I'd gathered evidence, was taking it to the territorial authorities. They tried to stop me. His eyes met Ilara's. I never meant to bring this danger to your door. Ilara straightened, Silas's strength flowing through her. Our door, she corrected firmly. We face things together now. Ilara, no, she cut him off. You've given us back our future, Julian. Helped us build something beautiful here. We won't let fear steal that from us. A horse's whinny broke the tension. Through the window, they saw Caleb and Lily returning early from school, accompanied by Sheriff Bolton. Julian Thorne, Sheriff Bolton called out as they approached. Got word of suspicious men watching the school. Thought it best to escort your young ones home. Julian's face hardened as he helped Lily down from her horse. Did you recognize any of them? No, sir, Lily answered, her voice steady, despite her obvious fear. But they had horses like the ones those men rode last summer when they came looking for you. Caleb stood close to Julian, unconsciously mimicking his protective stance. I saw them behind the mercantile too, watching us when we were shopping with Mama yesterday. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. They'd been watched, studied, their routines observed. Julian must have felt it too, because he turned to the sheriff with grim determination. John, I think it's time we discussed Stone's operations in detail. I have documentation you should see. The evidence you were carrying that night? The sheriff's hand rested meaningfully on his gun belt. Julian nodded. And more I've gathered since. Ilara's property deed, the threats to other ranchers, details of his strong-armed tactics. He glanced at the family. But first, we need to secure the homestead. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Julian and the sheriff organized armed patrols of trusted men. Ilara and the children brought the horses into the barn, secured windows, and prepared emergency supplies, just as they had before the storm. We've practiced for this too, Lily reminded Caleb as they filled water barrels. Remember what Julian taught us. Being prepared beats being afraid. Ilara overheard the exchange and felt fierce pride surge through her chest. Her children had grown so much, learning not just ranching skills from Julian, but courage and clear thinking in the face of danger. That evening, after the sheriff had left with Julian's evidence and extra patrols were in place, the family gathered close in the parlor. The Millers had insisted on staying despite the threat, Mr. Miller stating firmly that neighbors stand together. Julian held Ilara's hand tightly as they discussed plans for the coming days. No one spoke of fear, though it hung in the air like wood smoke. Instead, they talked of practical matters, guard rotations, supply checks, signals between houses. Whatever comes, Julian said finally, looking at each beloved face in turn, we face it as a family. And in that moment, watching her children's brave faces in the firelight, Ilara knew they would prevail. Love had built this family. Fear would not tear it apart. The attack came 3 nights later, during the darkest hour before dawn. Ilara woke to the smell of smoke and Julian's urgent voice. They've set the far pasture on fire. They're trying to draw us out. The family moved with practiced precision. No panic, no wasted motion. Lily and Caleb helped the Miller children into the storm cellar while their parents joined the bucket line. Julian's wound from the storm had barely healed, but he worked tirelessly, directing men, coordinating their defense. They're coming from the North Ridge. Sheriff Bolton's voice carried over the chaos. At least 8 riders. Ilara's heart clenched as she saw Julian check his six-shooter, his face set in grim lines. Stay with the children, he told her, but she caught his arm. Your wound. I'll be fine. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. Keep them safe. But as he turned to leave, Lily's voice rang out from behind them. Riders coming from the south too, through the winter wheat. Julian spun, realizing they were being flanked. Ilara saw the moment his tactical mind shifted, analyzing their position. They'd prepared for an attack, but not from 2 directions. The barn, he decided. Everyone inside. It's the strongest building we have. They rushed to comply, shepherding children and adults alike into the fortified structure. Julian's improvements had made it as solid as a fortress, with clear lines of sight and defensive positions. As Ilara helped Mrs. Miller with the youngest children, she heard Julian and the sheriff organizing their defense. Caleb, Julian called. Remember where we stored the extra ammunition? Yes, sir. Behind the loose board in the tack room. Good lad. Lily, your mother's rifle. Already got it, Julian. Lily appeared with Ilara's Winchester, her young face determined. And I remember what you taught me about loading it. Ilara felt a surge of pride through her fear. Her children were scared, yes, but they were their father's children, and now Julian's too. They knew what needed to be done. The first shots came as a warning, pinging off the barn's metal roof. They want to scare us out, Julian explained, positioning defenders at strategic points. Stone prefers to avoid outright murder. Bad for business. Then what do they want? Mr. Miller asked, cradling his youngest. A show of force to prove we're helpless without Triple Crown protection. Julian's voice hardened. But we're not helpless. As if to underscore his point, Lily called out, Mama, they're moving the fire closer to the house. Ilara met Julian's eyes across the barn. Their home, everything they'd built together, stood vulnerable. But before either could speak, Caleb stepped forward. The irrigation system, he said firmly. The one Julian designed. We can flood the north field from here. Julian's face lit with fierce pride. The control lever, there, in the barn wall. Ilara, your boy's a genius. Our boy, she corrected softly, watching Caleb and Julian work the irrigation controls together. Water began gushing across the north field, creating a barrier between the fire and the house, but their success was short-lived. A bullet splintered the barn door, and suddenly the night erupted in gunfire. Stay down, Julian ordered, returning fire through a defensive port. But as he turned, Ilara saw him stumble, his old wound reopening under the strain. Julian, she rushed to him, pressing her hand against the growing bloodstain on his shirt. It's nothing, he tried to assure her, but his face was pale with pain. Papa's hurt, Caleb cried out, forgetting himself in his fear. The word hung in the air for a moment, even amid the chaos. Julian's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with pain. I'm all right, son, he said hoarsely. we all will be. As if, in answer to his words, a new sound cut through the night. Horses approaching at a gallop, many of them. Sheriff Bolton risked a look through the window. "It's the Triple Crown hands," he shouted. "Must be 20 of them, coming in from the east." The ranch hands' arrival turned the tide. Caught between law enforcement and loyal Triple Crown men, Stone's forces quickly retreated. As the gunfire faded, Ilara helped Julian to his feet, supporting him as they emerged from the barn. Their home still stood, thanks to Caleb's quick thinking. The fire was contained, and the arriving ranch hands were already helping to extinguish it completely. But it was the scene inside the barn that struck Ilara most deeply. Their two families huddled together, her children showing the younger ones how to be brave, everyone supporting each other through the crisis. Julian leaned heavily on her shoulder, watching the same scene. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for bringing this danger." "Stop." Ilara turned to face him. "You heard Caleb. You're his papa now. Our children chose you, Julian Thorne, and so did I. Whatever comes, we face it together." Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow-covered land in shades of pink and gold. Their world had changed in the night, but they had emerged stronger, their bonds tested by fire and fear, and found unbreakable. In the quiet days following the attack, healing took many forms. Julian's physical wound mended slowly under Ilara's careful attention, but it was the deeper healing within the family that proved most profound. The children were the first to broach the subject that hung in the air. Lily and Caleb stood in the doorway of Julian's recovery room, clutching something behind their backs. "Papa," Lily said softly, testing the word that Caleb had cried out in fear. "We made you something." Julian's breath caught at the title, his eyes meeting Ilara's where she sat beside his bed. She nodded encouragingly, her heart full. The children brought forward a handmade wooden box, its lid carved with desert roses, like those on Lily's saddle. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band that Ilara recognized with a start. "It was Dad's," Caleb explained, his voice quiet but steady. "We found it in Mama's cedar chest. We thought, well, we thought maybe it was time it had a new purpose." Julian sat up straighter, emotion clear on his face. "Children, I couldn't. Dad would want you to have it," Lily interrupted. "He always said love was about protecting family. That's what you did. What you do." Ilara moved to sit on the bed beside Julian, taking his hand. "They're right," she said softly. "Silas would approve of the man who's helped raise his children, who's taught them strength and courage and love." Julian looked at the ring, then at the faces of his family, for they were truly his family now, bound by choice and love and shared trials. "I'd be honored," he said hoarsely, "but only if your mother agrees to make it official." He turned to Ilara, his eyes full of meaning. "I should be on one knee for this, but—" "You're exactly where you should be," Ilara answered, tears threatening. "Surrounded by our children, in our home, asking a question we've all known the answer to for months." Caleb bounced on his toes. "So you'll marry him, Mama?" "Yes," Ilara laughed, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry him." Lily carefully placed Silas's ring in Julian's palm. As he slipped it onto Ilara's finger, she felt the weight of past and present combining, not replacing old love, but building something new from its foundation. Later that evening, as the children shared the news with the Millers, who had insisted on staying until Julian was fully recovered, Ilara found herself alone with her fiancé. "I've been thinking," Julian said, his voice thoughtful, "about names and legacies." "Oh, the Triple Crown?" "It was named for Thorne, But maybe it's time for a change. The circle 5, perhaps, for Vance. Ilara touched his face gently. The children carry the Vance name proudly. But maybe we need something new. Something that represents all of us. Julian caught her hand, kissing her palm. What did you have in mind? The Morning Glory Ranch, she suggested. For Seraphina's flowers, for new beginnings, for beauty that opens fresh each day. His eyes grew misty. Trust you to find the perfect way to honor both our pasts while building our future. He shifted carefully, mindful of his healing wound. I've been working on something else too. Had planned to wait, but he reached for his journal, opening it to a marked page. Inside lay adoption papers, already drawn up, waiting only for signatures. If the children want, he said softly, they'll always be Vance by blood, but they could be Thorns too. A fresh start for all of us. Ilara read through tears as Julian explained his plan. How the children could choose to keep Vance as a middle name, honoring their father while adding Thorn to mark their new chapter. How he'd already discussed it, with the town lawyer ensuring everything would be legal and proper. We'll ask them together, she decided, when you're stronger. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lily, carrying Julian's evening medicine. Ilara watched as their daughter fussed over him with gentle competence, adjusting his pillows, checking his bandage, just as she'd been taught. Lily, Julian said as she turned to leave, would you and Caleb join us for a moment? There's something we'd like to discuss. Ilara held his hand as they presented the adoption option to the children. The joy on their faces, the completeness of their acceptance, was all the answer they needed. That night, writing in her journal, Ilara reflected on how love transformed. Silas's ring now carried new promises. Seraphina's flowers bloomed in their future ranch's name, and their children would carry both their past and their future in their very names, a family bridging what was and what would be, stronger for having been tested by fire. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and wedding preparations. The morning glory vines Lily had planted around the porch posts were just beginning to sprout, promising summer blooms for their newly named ranch. The whole community had embraced the upcoming celebration, seeing it as a symbol of hope after the darkness of winter's trials. Ilara stood still as Mistress Willow adjusted her wedding dress, her mother's gown, carefully altered to fit both her figure and the times. Lily watched the process with shining eyes, her own new dress laid out on the bed. Something borrowed, Mistress Willow said, pinning a delicate lace collar. This was my grandmother's, brought all the way from Boston. And something blue, Lily added, bringing forward a sapphire brooch. Julian had it made to match his eyes, she grinned. He said to tell you it's also something new. Ilara touched the jewel gently. And something old? That would be me, came a gravelly voice from the doorway. Reverend Abernathy, who had married Ilara and Silas all those years ago, stood leaning on his cane. Though I suspect I'm not quite what the tradition had in mind. The old minister had insisted on performing the ceremony despite his failing health. Married you to your first love, he'd said to Ilara. Only fitting I should marry you to your second. The good Lord knows the heart can grow to hold more love. The days leading up to the wedding transformed their homestead. The barn, once a fortress against danger, became a flower-filled reception hall. The Millers, now settled in their rebuilt cabin, helped string lanterns from the rafters. Caleb proved himself an expert at directing the decorating crews, his natural talent for organization shining through. Julian, for his part, seemed to have his own surprises in store. Mysterious packages arrived from Denver, and he spent long hours in private conversation with Lily, who guarded their secrets with diplomatic skill. "You'll see, Mama," was all she would say, her eyes twinkling with shared conspiracy. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Elara woke to find a gift on her pillow, a framed family portrait, the first they'd taken together. She and Julian sat in the center, the children standing behind them, all four faces glowing with happiness. The frame was carved with desert roses and wheat stalks, combining both their pasts into their shared future. A note in Julian's hand read, "Our first official family portrait, though you've been in my heart far longer. Today, we make it legal, my love." The ceremony itself was everything Elara hadn't known she wanted. Simple, yet profound. Intimate, yet shared with their whole community. Lily and Caleb stood up with them, not just as children, but as vital parts of the family being joined. When it came time for the vows, Julian surprised them all by turning first to the children. "Before I make my promises to your mother," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "I have promises for you." He withdrew two small boxes. "These are pocket watches, like the one that brought me to your door that stormy night. They're engraved with your new names, the ones you chose, honoring both your fathers." Lily opened hers with trembling fingers, reading aloud, "Lily Vance Thorne, beloved daughter." Caleb's voice joined hers. "Caleb Vance Thorne, cherished son." Julian continued, his eyes bright. "I promise to carry you in my heart as my own, to honor the memory of the good man who gave you life, and to spend every day trying to be worthy of the title you've given me, Papa." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Julian then turned to Elara, taking her hands in his. "And to you, my love, I promise partnership in all things, to build our Morning Glory Ranch together, to raise our children in love and wisdom, to face whatever storms may come with the same courage you showed on that first night when you took in a wounded stranger and changed all our lives forever." Elara's response came from her heart, unrehearsed but true. "I promise to continue building this beautiful life with you, to blend our family's legacies into something new and wonderful, and to face each dawn, grateful for the love that brought us together." Reverend Abernathy beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. As Julian kissed her, Elara heard Lily whisper to Caleb, "Now we're officially Thorns too." The celebration that followed was a true community affair. Tables groaned with potluck dishes. Children played between the lantern-lit trees, and even the most proper ladies found themselves joining in when the dancing started. Looking around at their transformed barn, at their children dancing with the Miller kids, at Julian's face glowing with joy as he watched it all, Elara felt the rightness of their journey. They had built this happiness together, brick by brick, choice by choice, love by love. The morning glories might not be blooming yet, but their promise was there, in every green shoot, reaching for the sun. New life, new beginnings, new beauty, opening fresh each day. 1 year later, Elara sat in the parlor of the Morning Glory Ranch, recording the day's events in the leather-bound journal Julian had given her. Through the window, desert roses bloomed in vibrant purple and blue, their vines strong and established now, just like the family they represented. The new family Bible lay open beside her, its pages recording their joined lives, the children's adoption, the wedding, and now her hand strayed to her growing belly, the newest thorn due to arrive with the spring. "Move those longhorns to the north pasture. Careful now." Lily's voice drifted in from outside, confident and clear as she directed the ranch hands. At 15, she'd grown into her role as Julian's apprentice, showing a natural talent for ranch management that made her father beam with pride. She's got both our heads for business, Julian had said recently, watching Lily calculate breeding records, and both our hearts for the land. Caleb, now 12, had found his own path, combining Silas's gift for woodworking with Julian's engineering mind. The elegant cradle taking shape in his workshop proved how well those inherited talents blended. Elara smiled, remembering the morning Caleb had presented his design plans, explaining how he'd incorporated elements from both families: desert roses carved along the rails, wheat stalks in the headboard, all supported by the solid craftsmanship Silas had taught him to value. The baby should know where they come from, he'd said seriously, all the parts that made us who we are. A commotion from the yard drew Elara to the window. Julian was returning from the Triple Crown headquarters, where Stone's trial had finally concluded. The children rushed to meet him, and even from a distance, Elara could read the good news in his bearing. "Guilty on all counts," he announced as she joined them. "The evidence was too strong to ignore. Stone's empire is finished." Lily hugged him fiercely. "Does this mean the Morning Glory Ranch is safe?" "Safe and growing," Julian confirmed, drawing Elara into their embrace. "The territorial judge granted us the water rights Stone had tried to steal. We can expand the breeding program like we planned." Caleb looked up from the family cluster. "Then we can help more families, like we helped the Millers." "That's right, son." Julian ruffled his hair. "The Morning Glory Ranch will be a place that grows more than just cattle. It'll grow hope." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Elara and Julian sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of the flowers that had become their symbol. "I found something today," Julian said, pulling a worn envelope from his vest. "While going through the last of the trial documents, it was the threatening letter Stone had sent a year ago, its words now powerless to inspire fear." Elara read it again, remembering the terror of that time, the way it had forged them into something stronger. "We've come so far," she murmured, leaning into her husband's strength. "We have." Julian's hand covered hers where it rested on her growing belly. "Sometimes I think about that night, bleeding in your wheat field, how close I came to never knowing this happiness." "God had other plans," Elara said softly, "for all of us." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch. A longhorn lowed in the distance, horses shuffled in the barn, and somewhere an owl called to its mate. All the ordinary precious sounds of a life built with love. "I added something to the Bible today," Julian said eventually. "Been meaning to for a while." Elara followed him inside, where he opened the family Bible to a new page. There, in his neat hand, he'd written, "Let it be known that love builds bridges across loss. That family is formed by choice as much as blood. And that hope, like desert roses, blooms fresh each day." The Thorn family, born from the Vance and Thorn lines, stands as testament to God's grace in giving second chances and new beginnings. Written this day in gratitude for the night a poor widow and her kids saved a dying cowboy, not knowing he would be God's answer to their prayers, just as they were the answer to his. Tears blurred Elara's vision as she read. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Our story should be preserved," Julian said, holding her close, "so our children and their children will know that love can heal any wound, build any bridge, transform any life. They should know they come from people who chose love over fear, hope over despair, and found their happy ending by believing in new beginnings." Elara touched the words on the page, then reached up to touch her husband's face. Outside, the evening stars shone bright over the Morning Glory Ranch, blessing the home and family that had grown from one simple act of kindness on a stormy Montana night.